Alright, I'll start with a prayer. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستغفر ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا من سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له أشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد. I want to thank everyone for coming. It's a lot of new faces, which is nice. I was here a month ago and we had a discussion with many of you, and since then you guys have had a lot of guest speakers. Some of my friends have come in, Patricia and Sarwar. I'm sure I was actually meeting with Sarwar a week before he came. How many people were here when he was here? Sarwar, he was talking about love. It's, to be honest, I've kind of been in an interesting place for the last few weeks, and maybe for maybe similar reasons to some of you, maybe different. I mentioned this to, I think, the people who were here last month. When you've kind of been on the speaking circuit for as long as I have, I've been on this lecture circuit since I was 19. I'm 31 now. So it's been a pretty long time, 12 years, 13 years. And I'm mentioning this not to at all to boast, because I don't think of this as an accomplishment, but just to give you a perspective on certain things. I've been to about 200 communities in the US and Canada over and over again, and I've just been on the road there were times where I'd be on the road 35 to 40 weekends a year, doing different projects, performing, speaking. And you kind of get a big picture of what's happening in a lot of places. And I always tell people it was always kind of interesting for me, because I was so-called well-known enough that I was invited a lot of places, but I wasn't famous enough that people acted different around me. So I wasn't like a famous person coming to town and it's like, you know, everyone changes. Like, I don't know, when I was like around some of my friends or mentors that are a little more like, you know, YouTube sensations and stuff, when they walk into a room, everyone becomes fake. So even though they were around maybe as much as I was, they didn't really get an honest portrait of what people are going through. I was in these type of settings a lot after my lectures, where we just meet with people and we get to know human beings. And a lot of, because of my music, a lot of it was outside the Muslim community, and it was very formative. And when the Paris thing happened, I think for a lot of people, because I was traveling and I was meeting people, there's this fatigue that's kind of come over a lot of people. There's like, how much indignation are you going to have? How many times are you going to say you're not a terrorist and I'm not this? How many times are you going to define yourself in terms of what you're not? And at some point, you just want to say who you are. I was 16 when the attacks on September 11th happened. And I remember it was a day, I think a lot of people, it was the ISTEP, National ISTEP Day. So a lot of the high schoolers were in and out of exams. And I remember the day when it happened, and I remember it was the same thing a lot of people felt when the California thing happened recently. It was like, please don't be Muslims. That was kind of the common, you know, and everyone's kind of, I'm mentioning this because this is kind of where people are at. And as soon as Osama bin Laden's picture, because we didn't really know Osama bin Laden too much before that, you know, CIA had been watching him, but it wasn't really public knowledge. As soon as his picture went up, I was part of the school newspaper. I started writing an article, like, it was a weird response. Like, I saw it, and I started writing an article about Islam. And it was my first time. I was a part of the theater club. I was never a spokesperson for religion. You know what I mean? That was like, I grew up in a small town, Fishers, Indiana, only Muslim in my school, 2,500 students. I was part of the soccer team. It was never, I was very involved in the Muslim community nationally, but locally, I wasn't a spokesperson or an ambassador of anything. And that was my first response. And the reason was that I knew when I saw that image of the Twin Towers and we were watching it live, like we saw the second plane going in, you know, we were watching it live. And I just knew everything had changed. But I assumed that it had changed for a year. I didn't think that 14 years later it would still inform our discourse as much as it does. I didn't think that because they named they named the event after a date, like 4th of July, it would be imprinted in the public consciousness as a date. That you cannot be on September 10th and not think, oh, tomorrow's September 11th. But if I say the day of Pearl Harbor, you don't know the date, most people. But they named it after a date, and it was significant. The only other date we have is 4th of July, right? I mean, there's a reason for that. And so what happened for me is very intriguing. I wrote an article when I was in college. I went to college in DC, 5 miles from where the attacks happened on the Pentagon. And I remember when we were on campus, I think the speech is going to take a turn that may be different than what you're expecting, but I want to set it up to at least say that I do get where we are. Whenever we would see a plane going overhead, like this was in 2003 when I started college, everybody on campus would literally go like this. it was like a really weird time. And one time we were walking on M Street, which is by our campus, and it's like the big shopping area and everything. And there was like an explosion, and the street literally shook. And I saw like all of us, like 1,000 of us, just start running. It's a very bizarre scene. And we saw smoke coming on from the Key Bridge going into DC. And as we were running, there's like smoke, like literally spreading, and everyone knew it was another terrorist attack. This is 2003. And we ran up to the top of the Georgetown steps, and like the Exorcist, that's where the Exorcist movie was filmed, and which is always a creepy place to run up when you think there's a terrorist attack happening. And we looked, and it was just smoke over DC. 2 hours later, we found out that there was like some Chinese New Year celebration, and there had been a mishap in the fireworks. But that was kind of the lived reality, right? And so I guess what I'm saying is that there's a certain level of collective trauma that people are in. And it's not just the Muslim community, it's every American, everyone who witnessed those events. And we have to have mercy of people's trauma, even if it leads people to act in deranged ways. It's very important. Part of the way you empower yourself is you have mercy, because a victim has a hard time having mercy. So if you actually have mercy for people, you stop being a victim. My friend Kareem Salama, some of you know him, he's a very well-known country musician. He was with my other friend Sean Hannity. That's a joke. But I don't hate Sean Hannity, you know, even though like he definitely misquoted me on Palestine once, and I became like the hero of the right wing, the Zionists, for about 4 days. Because he asked me about something and he literally misquoted. It was actually a local newspaper who asked me, and then a local university newspaper, and then he took that and put it on his blog. It's the level of journalism. But he was talking to Kareem Salama on National Fox, you know, an interview. And Kareem had just come out with a country album. And he says, "You're a Muslim country artist, aren't you?" And Kareem said, you know, because he knew right away what he was doing. He was going to put him in that paradigm, and then the viewers would see him through that lens. He says, "I'm a country artist." And he said, this was unrelated to his album release. He says that you must be very afraid. And he was using that sympathetic tone to lure him in. He says, you must be very afraid of how Muslims are going to be treated after 9/11. Right now, if you're simplistic, you'll take that opportunity and be like, yeah, thank you for saying that. There's going to be so much persecution, and I am very afraid. And he didn't play into the game, though. He looked at him, and I know Kareem, I know this is the way he is. He actually didn't grow up with Muslims. He grew up in a spiritual tradition, but he wasn't actually around the so-called, which is I think a euphemism, but Muslim community. He didn't grow up in that culture. And so he looked at Sean Hannity right in the eyes, and he says, why would I be afraid of Muslims? What Muslims are going to go through. He says, well, isn't there going to be, he didn't say there is, because he didn't want to give it up. He says, isn't there going to be persecution towards your community? He's like, I'm from Oklahoma, that's my community. And then Sean Hannity now is like, oh crap, he saw through it. So he said, no, but won't a lot of people, aren't they going to talk bad about Muslims? He's like, look, and he meant this. He says, I'm worried about the families of those firefighters and the innocent people who were killed. That's an interesting point you're making, but I never thought about Muslims. And it was over. The interview, he couldn't go anywhere. So he literally just said, well, I really enjoyed your album. And that was like the end of it. What I'm saying is that, you know, when Malcolm was asked in an interview, Malcolm X, Malika Shabazz, when he was asked, he said, they said, Malcolm, how does it feel being is it difficult being a minority in America? It was the same thing he was being asked. He was being lured with false sympathy. And Malcolm did the right thing. He looked at the interviewer in the eyes. This was a UC Berkeley interview he did in like 63. He looked at the interviewer in the eyes, and he says, I'm not a minority in America. And the man says, you're a colored man in America. How are you not a minority? He says, colored men and women are the majority of America. And the man looked at him and he says, no, African American, you know, whatever, Negroes only makes, and he used that term, Negroes only make this small percentage of Americans. And he says, oh, you're talking about United States. You said America. And the guy kind of just like went back, and he says, in the Americas, and now he included North America, South America, colored people are by far the majority. So I don't feel myself being a minority. And Kareem said that in his interview too. He says, I'm not a minority. He says that if I believe in truth and justice and all this, then I'm part of the majority of America. So he reframed the discussion. He didn't play into it. So what I guess, you know, and I think the reason I asked Amanda to start off this as a discussion is that I don't think a topic like this is a lecture-worthy topic, like where someone comes and speaks about it. I can share my reflections, and hopefully, I've heard some of yours, but we can hear more of yours. But what I hope to do, because I know you guys are going to have weekly meetings after this, is to just say a few points that become discussion points. And you can agree or disagree. It's not a lecture of that sort. I want to say some big picture ideas, hopefully, that can help maybe reframe this discussion. And so I'll start off. About 4 days ago, I was in Allentown. We were having our pumpkin pie night. It's always weird when we're eating pie. Always really bad things happen. So I think we should stop eating pie. But we always do these cutesy things, and then like people go kill people in the same day. So I have like a weird association pumpkin pie now, which is horrible because I love pumpkin pie. But we were eating pumpkin pie, and we had our whole village. We have a little village in Allentown. We were eating pumpkin pie, and the news came out about California. And the first report came out about it being neo-Nazis. And no one wants to say this, but if we're going to be honest, everyone was like, whew, like thank you, neo-Nazis. Not like thank you, but like, it's like we get a 3-day break. And then the name came out, Said Farouk, and I'm like, because my name is Saad, right? I was just like, really, dude? Like, and it was just so frustrating. But I think, like I said, and this is where I think my speech is going to, my presentation is going to depart maybe from where you're expecting. Everyone in the group kind of went to the same reaction of like, okay, we need to do outreach, we need to tell people who we are, we need to have a vigil. Like, this was like the immediate reactions. We need to write a strongly worded status message that this doesn't represent Islam. And we went into reactionary mode. And sometimes what happens is like when you're in a battle, like in a war, right? You don't have time to actually think. And you go to your like fight or flight instincts. You go to some basic carnal instincts. What is it? Reptilian mind like kicks in, exactly. So I saw us kind of going into, like, we have a default setting for when Muslims are going to be accused of something. It's like talking points. And as a community, we go through it right away. And I feel like we have to break that cycle. Because there's a victimization that's implied in those talking points. So where I went was what I'm going to share now. And some of you have read it. Hala has read it, apparently.
Sorry.
No. Everyone get settled.
That's why I'm trying.
People can sit on the floor too. People can sit on the floor. They'll be more intimate.
Yeah, let's just sit. It's fine.
It's okay.
You stay?
No, people can stay right there though. If people just sit here, it'll be informal. So.
Yeah, just please.
There's some space right there. Just have a seat on the floor as well. It's fine. Some
Did I talk last time about? I wanted to bring up this concept. I forget if I did or not. Double consciousness. W.E.B. Du Bois. This notion.
Oh yeah, you did.
I did, right? Okay, good. I want to refer to it, but I didn't know if I had spoken to
We
it.
have a lot of new people as well.
Yeah. Okay. So. People can come sit over here too.
Yeah, please.
No, have a seat, please.
Come sit. Anywhere. It's fine.
Guys, this is the deep squad in this corner.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. All right. Where was it? Okay. Yeah. So when the California incident happened, my mind kind of went in a very different direction, and I mentioned last month. Can someone remind me, if you guys remember, about the idea of double consciousness? W.E.B. Du Bois, from his book Souls of Black Folk. Can someone share, because there's a lot of new people here, what the idea of double consciousness is? A little pop quiz. You guys remember talking about it? Who wants to do it? Okay, so for sake of time, W.E.B. Du Bois was the second African American to graduate from Harvard. He had a PhD in sociology, and he wrote in his 1940s book Souls of Black Folk. He was talking specifically about the African American at that time, and I was contextualizing that in our own experience. he said that the African American is, in his time, he said, is blessed and cursed with something called double consciousness. That he or she must forever see themselves through the lens of the other. And in doing so, does not develop self-consciousness. That you define yourself by what you are not. I am not less than you, to the white man. I am not a terrorist. I am not a violent person. Or you define your faith by what it is not. You say to people that Islam means peace. You would not have intellectually said that if people were not saying it means violence. So even though that may be a true statement, you've actually changed surrender, which Islam doesn't actually mean peace. It's a surrender that sometimes manifests as a ceasefire. And just like every religious tradition, there's a notion of there are times to stand up, even physically, for truth. There's a time where peace is found in not being peaceful. But when people call you a terrorist and they use the term jihad as holy war, which actually came around during the time of the Crusades, there's a whole context to that, you actually start amplifying certain parts of your faith and you start minimizing other parts of your faith. You actually change yourself to become more acceptable. And you still act like you're being bold and proud. But the big change is not what's happened in people's opinions of you. The big change is what could happen and what did happen 14 years after 9/11, is that the Muslim community loses its fire because it's afraid that people are saying it's burn people. And so I wrote an article in 2005, this was very early after 9/11, the fire that was lost after the smoke cleared. That the whole rhetoric of the Muslim community changed. Our conventions became public service announcements, as if it was being said to C-SPAN and the 20,000 other people there were just there to clap. So we would stand on the mic and say, and there was a reason maybe the first 10 times they said it, they had to say it, but the main speaker at ISNA was no longer talking about introspection, no longer talking about positive theology. It was all, Islam means peace. We're all clapping like, we are not terrorists. So like, we know that, so okay, so this is not for us. So then we tuned out. It's like, we're just here for a show. So that if someone were to see the video, they see, oh, the room is packed with people who agree with that. There's something that's very twisted about that. And there's something that's pseudo-empowerment. Because you're actually changing yourself to become more acceptable. And how did that work out? How did that work out? It didn't work out. Because as soon as the next incident happens, and here's why, and here's where I wrote the status I'm going to share. The problem is, they say that ISIS represents 0.0001%. And we're very excited about saying that to people. That they don't represent 99.9999% of us. Here's where that's disingenuous. Okay? And if I get in a little trouble for this, I'll get in a little trouble for this. Because discourse has to be honest. And it doesn't matter if you're being attacked, it doesn't matter if you're in a period of weakness or a period of strength. If you lose your honesty, you're nothing. It doesn't matter if others validate you. Otherwise, we're post-colonial people that still want the other to like us. And we hate, because the question is, what is so different? Because people, a lot of people have been saying that the last 2 months, it seems like the whole world changed. The Paris thing really is heavy on us. And it should be heavy on us because innocent people died, but it's heavy on us for other reasons. And I want to be critical of that. And I don't want to go into the whole thing of, well, when 200 people die in Paris, it's a big deal, but when 2,000 people, I'm not making that. I don't use quantitative measures for innocent death. I don't do that. But the question is, why is the recent events, and this may sound like a blasphemous question, but why is it so heavy on us? Is it because people died? People have been dying? Not to minimize what happened. Is it because people die in the name of religion? When people are blowing people up in Iraq in the name of religion, it wasn't as heavy. Why is it so heavy on us? It's heavy on us, for many of us, not because of what happened, but because it affects us. We're not as upset about the people who died. We are, of course. But what's different about it is not that. Is that now it's coming closer to home. Now it's not the discourse of, Muslims, a lot of Muslims are terrorists, but there's good and bad. Now you can pretty much say the Quran is intrinsically violent and any devout Muslim is intrinsically violent. Now, when Trump says what everyone talked about Trump, the reason Trump is so problematic is one, he's Trump, and you just never thought, 2 years ago, who would have thought of all the people? But anyways, they're now calling him the new Reagan. Like an actor who can, I'm like, really? Like Arnold Schwarzenegger is more likely to be Reagan than Trump. Anyways, and he's not even, allowed to be president. Okay, but the point is that what shifted in the current climate is actually, we really, no matter what happened in the world, no matter what happened in our inner cities, we actually believed if we went into our nice suburban homes and locked the door and turned on Netflix, that we could be empathetic for others, but it would never actually reach us. And now we're getting a hint, like, some of you guys may have also known them, like I was friends with the Barakat family. So when Dia was killed in North Carolina, I had been with them like a year before. I had stayed and spent a whole day with Dia. And when that happened, though, the reason that affected so many people was because if there was an inner city family that had been killed, it wouldn't have had that impact. Reality was these were like MSA kids. They were suburban kids. They were involved with like Muslims Without Borders. They were going to the MSA and ISNA conferences. They were like me. And we don't ever get touched. We are generally pretty safe. Or the greatest thing that can happen to us is a 2-hour delay at an airport. That's what people felt. So some of this is actually not about what's happening in the world. We have to be honest about it, is that we have now entered the game. So how have we entered the game? So this is, for me, I'm not depressed. I'm sad because innocent people are dying, and that's unfortunately been a reality since Cain killed Abel. That's a human reality. I mean, you didn't have a generation where that didn't happen, because when Adam and Eve they're like aliens who came on Earth, and they literally were. They're not from Earth, so that's why we are technically aliens by lineage. Like a definition of an alien, no, I mean definitionally we are aliens because we did not originate on Earth, right? Like Superman, even if he has kids, they're still aliens because they. Okay, so when these aliens, our forefathers, I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, they were literally not from Earth, and they came to Earth. When they had children, the first Earthlings killed each other. So that's been happening. But there's something we're missing, and the point I was making about the ISIS thing. So when you have 0.00, because it's very easy to blame Trump. It's very easy to blame Fox News. It's very easy to blame the guy with the AK-47. Because when you blame someone else, it's false empowerment, because there is no onus on you. The problem is with the world. They don't understand us. Not that we have not done a good job of informing anyone of anything. The Prophet ﷺ said, the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, you are responsible for your 40 closest neighbors. But that's not where the criticism is going. If every Muslim family had reached out to their 40 closest neighbors, we wouldn't have this problem. So for me, and the next morning I woke up and I wrote this, and it wasn't a post about Islam doesn't do this or doesn't do this. It was a reflection on myself and my community, and this is it. For years we have lived materialistic, self-centered lives. We built mosques that were not welcoming, schools that were not enriching, religion that did not nourish, and communities that were not inclusive. We became insular, claimed Malcolm X, ignored inner cities, made spirituality elitist, frowned at the blind man, Abasa wa Tawalla, silenced dissent, demonized Shias, disconnected from nature, pursued safe, uninspired careers, doctor, engineer, etc. Those are not uninspired if you're actually inspired by it, but not if you're inspired by money. Pursued safe, uninspired careers, labeled people non-Muslims, which is a negative association. It's like calling us non-Jews. Made knowledge inaccessible, tweeted Black Lives Matter, rejected black suitors for marriage, supported weak art, rejected real artists, bought glossy pop nasheeds, reduced hijab to headscarf, embraced capitalism, accepted ahistorical narratives, spoiled our children, voted for Obama, ignored Imam Waridin Muhammad, raised millions for dysfunctional schools and empty prayer halls, refused to fund cultural and social programming, conflated counterculture with hipsters and hijabistas, followed charisma over substance, taught religion superficially, changed Islam from a verb to a noun to an adjective, Islamic, presented mediocre khutbahs and sermons, sided with power, criticized white privilege, built castles in white suburbs, received empty degrees, stifled our hearts, amplified our minds, fed the machine, became consumed by consumerism, stigmatized mental health, silenced abuse, ignored neighbors, watched too many videos, read too few books, obsessed over our children, neglected the larger ecosystem, mocked the liberal arts, chased status, embraced American exceptionalism, dismissed the third world, forgot about the incarcerated, replaced emotions with emojis, idolized the oppressor, betrayed the oppressed, developed Stockholm Syndrome, bought into Muslim celebrity culture, criticized the media, forbade our children from becoming journalists, created cliques around scholars, rejected critical thought, embraced groupthink, event hopped from conference to conference, consumed theory without practice, supported corporations, counted conversions, neglected converts, married for money, vilified the other, mocked immigrants, fobs, ignored social movements, embraced tribalism, lined up for Black Friday, justified wealth with religion, resisted literacy, politicized our mosques, doctored and engineered our boards, excluded women and working class from leadership, lacked urgency, dressed like Moses, lived like Pharaoh, hid behind religious rhetoric, brushed off domestic abuse, changed our Facebook status while remaining chained to the status quo, deluded ourselves into a coma of passivity. Now we wake up. The curtain has been pulled, the mirage has faded. Major lifestyle and paradigm shifts are required. Courage is demanded. A generation of young people who are financially spoiled, technologically addicted, and spiritually empty must rise through their darkness and take part in a communal repentance and revival, a revolution against apathy and despair. And the quote from Lord of the Rings, "A light from the shadows shall spring. Believe it, live it, spread it." For me, if you look at the story of Malcolm, and I know that the idea of this was to have Malcolm Month next. If you look at any revolutionary prophet, if you look at Martin Luther King, if you look at Moses, and you go back, you look at Sitting Bull, at Wounded Knee, he refused to be a reactionary prophet. He refused to accept the paradigm and to assert his identity as the opposite of that paradigm. I'll explain what that means. To be the opponent, like, okay, Robin Hood could not define his entire life as in opposition to the Sheriff of Nottingham. Because even to define himself as only an outlaw, you're within the game. So for Malcolm, we love Malcolm X. We don't like Malika Shabazz as much. That's like, we have this like fake attachment to Malcolm X. One, we don't even know anything about him. But like we love that Palestine quote because it fits our worldview, right? But if you want to talk about Malcolm, he didn't die Malcolm. We all love his speeches and Malcolm's rhetoric and all that. That's all good. He died Al-Hajj Malika Shabazz. Now, why is that important? And the reality is, there's a reason we put Malcolm X in our quotes and we don't put Al-Hajj Malika Shabazz. But anyways, without getting into that, Malcolm X, as cool as the name is X, why did he call himself Malcolm X? He was born Malcolm Little. He saw that Little was a slave name. So he says, I refuse to be called by my slave name. I will be this X. Right? I wrote a poem about him where I say ballet of bullets because he has a speech, Ballad of the Bullet. A ballet of bullets, Harlem's last night meets the morning. And we're still mourning, the nameless saint has fallen. So he called himself the nameless one. He took the X. However, by calling himself X, he was calling himself unknown. He was saying that I'd rather be X than little. But that's still reactionary. If you see an interview with Lauryn Hill after her Unplugged session, where they're like, why don't you write another album like The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill from Fugees, if you don't know who she is? She says, I refuse to play the role of the angry black woman. Even the revolutionary black woman, that was an artificial role that was wanted of me. I just want to be myself. And sometimes I don't feel political. I don't feel deep. I don't feel, and I just want to be myself. Malcolm X, when Malcolm X took on the name Al-Hajj Malika Shabazz, it wasn't just an Arabized name, because that's not important to have an Arabized name. he was actually making a philosophical statement. I was not going to define myself in reaction to a slave name. I was going to, so X represents that I am not a slave. That's still within the paradigm. I'm going to go on a spiritual pilgrimage that transcends America, that transcends slavery. I'm going to go, if the Atlantic slave trade went this way, I'm going to go that way, back to Africa. I'm going to reverse all of that. I'm going to take back time and I'm going to define myself. And when he said Malik, I think actually he meant Melik. Because Shabazz is clear, the tribe of Shabazz. I'm going to define myself by the kings of Africa. So why do I have to be an X? Why do I have to be unknown? Now I know. I would rather know who I am than define myself as unknown of what I'm not. So the switch from Malcolm X to Al-Hajj Malika Shabazz is a switch between defining yourself as a negative in opposition of the mainstream, which is good. It's better to be an outlaw than to be a puppet. But better than to just be an outlaw your whole life is to not just say we are not that, to say we are this. And that shift from Malcolm to Al-Hajj Malika Shabazz has not happened in the Muslim community. We are still not terrorists, but nobody knows what the heck we are. And the reality of why is because, and I started off with this, if ISIS has 0.0001%, and people say, oh, their message is only amplified because the media chooses to amplify it. That's weak talk. So basically you're saying, one, you don't have your own radios and media because no one in our community is allowed to go into media because you might as well, shoot yourself in the head than go into media. It's like suicide bombing in a different way. Going into any creative career. No, seriously. So we're not going to have that. We criticize the Jewish community, even though the Jewish community was ready to make $30,000 a year to work for NPR and then after 30 years have an anchor position. But we will not do that. And we're blaming external media for amplifying negative voices. That's weak. Sorry. The Nation of Islam built its own radio stations, and they didn't even have financial resources. Go to Masjid Muhammad in DC. They have an operating radio station. They weren't saying the media. They're like, we will create our own narrative. But when we say that they're amplifying, the reality is, if we're going to be honest with ourselves, and this is a scary point, there's estimates between 80 to 100,000 people are part of this ISIS thing. And now people say, oh, this was created by the bad. Okay, look, that's all of that is diverting blame. I've studied enough history. I know some of the macro consequences of where this stuff has come from. But saying that doesn't change the situation. And it's not necessarily very empowering. Do I think a lot of this are post-colonial? When you fragment an entire continent or two continents over a period of 250 years, there's going to be imbalances? I do. But what does that do for us? That's Malcolm still keeping the X. It's real. 400 years of slavery is real. But you have to become Al-Hajj Malika Shabazz. You have to allow yourself to heal from your own trauma. We can't be in a collective hangover after the intoxication of the golden years of our deen. Okay? And the 0.00, this is the point, the 0.0001%. The real question is, it's not enough to say they're killing people, 99.999% of Muslims don't kill people. The question is, that's passivity though. So they actually are actively killing people, we're not doing anything. So that's our counter argument. What the hell does that mean? So we're not killing people. So congratulations guys, you're not killing people. That's not the counter argument to ISIS. The question is, if there's 100,000 people, and if these guys can recruit people from Minnesota to go and kill people in Iraq, and we can't recruit people to do good work, then when there's a soup kitchen, if there's a rally for something, everyone shows up, because that's part of the victimized thing. And there is reasons to show up, don't get me wrong. But if you want to have a soup kitchen thing and 3 people show up, the real question is, why in the world is ISIS so much more effective than we are? Why are the 99.999% of people, why isn't there at least 1% of that group that are as passionate about good as ISIS is about what they do? And there isn't that group. I'm sorry. I spent 12 years trying to get people in our generation to not just become doctors and engineers, and for some people to become social activists. Everyone loves Malcolm X until they make a career choice. Then nobody loves him. And everybody loves Malcolm X until Malcolm shows up at your door asking for your daughter. And then you settle for the uninspired doctor that will beat that girl, but he's making $300,000, and there's a lot of forgiveness when the guy's rich. He doesn't have to be, I mean, you've seen the Beauty and the Beast situations overseas. It's all. So what I'm saying is courage is not just speaking at the face of actions. And that is shallow. So when someone goes and kills someone and we have a press release, it's not condemned. Like when the thing, it's kind of, and I'm not saying it's not shouldn't condemn it, because if they don't, then people will say, oh, you didn't condemn it. I get it, but just realize it doesn't do anything. That's all I'm saying. Like right when the California thing happened, like one of the first thoughts that came to my mind is, okay, I'm going to get an email in about 7 minutes. It's not condemns the horrific killings of California. That is not a counter argument. I'm sorry. Actions cannot be responded to with words. It rings hollow. It rings hollow. So what I'm saying, and I'll stop here, is that we understand philosophically that darkness is the absence of light. My criticism is not towards Fox News, because Fox News has always existed. Every prophetic leader has dealt with Fox News. Jesus had Fox News, the Roman Empire. Muhammad, peace be upon him, had Fox News, Abu Lahab. The problem is not Fox News or CNN. And James Baldwin said something really interesting, the great writer. He's like I think he was actually the real genius of the 60s, more than Malcolm and Martin, but the Muslims haven't embraced him properly. But he said, well, America has embraced him properly. But James Baldwin said that I actually prefer the racism of the South to the condescension of the North. He said, at least I know where they stand. At least they're being honest. Like Bill O'Reilly, actually, I mean, in a way I respect him. When he speaks, I know what he says. I know what he means. CNN, I have no idea what the heck they mean. So I'll take, in our deen, there's something worse than a kafir. It's a munafiq. So I'll take the kuffar. I'm not using that term. I know it's politicized, but I don't care. We can use those terms. I mean, those terms are part of our faith. We just don't think that everyone that's not a Muslim is a kafir. I talked about that last month. The definition of a kafir is not someone who doesn't believe in Islam. We have to be deeper than that. But I would take the kuffar of Fox over the munafiqeen of CNN and MSNBC. And for me, honesty is realizing that they're not the ones that are betraying our prophet or the prophets of old. They're not on his side. How can you betray someone you're against? What are we doing? And the lifestyle, and I'm not talking about let's start a interfaith event. Okay? You only have to do an interfaith event when you haven't naturally done things with your neighbors day to day. We shouldn't have to artificially do events. We should be in a loving, and it shouldn't be reactionary. We shouldn't take a shooting for us to care about people. It's not authentic. It's proselytizing. We don't hand out muffins with little Quranic verses underneath.
Sorry.
Yeah, please.
Add something. And honestly, I know a lot of people have this mentality where we want to talk to non-Muslims so we can make them Muslims and convert them to our religion. And honestly, that's not what our intention is, because first of all, it comes off, and second of all, you never know. That person may have a belief in God that's stronger than us.
Of course.
So I feel like when we do talk to our neighbor, it's because that's who we are.
Right.
I need to talk to my neighbor. I need to send her food. I need to remember them when I cook a dish to just send them over a plate. Right. You know what I mean? Because that will show who you are, what Islam is. Right. And so when something happened, like the other day, my neighbor, we've had discussions, like she came over once, and we had discussions about Christianity and Islam, how they're related. And so a few days after that, the shooting happened. Right. And she sent me a message, and I was like, whoa, I didn't even think that we had that connection, where she said, I'm sorry that there are people who don't represent the Islam that you represent. And for me, I was like, oh my God, subhanAllah, like for me, it was just, I wanted to know her more. She's a very sweet person. And that made me think how I need to start like changing how my relationship with other people is. It's not for me to just convert them. I don't want to add numbers to Islam. I just want to show who I am and my religion is.
Exactly.
It,
Exactly. And I think part of that though is and this is where I think I would love to see, if we're not reactionary, if we have honor, if we believe in who we are, if we have enough confidence that even at the moment of attack, we have courage to ask real questions, we have to ask ourselves, why have we continued using the term non-Muslim? I've been talking about this for a decade. Actually, I was corrected. I was speaking at Indiana University, and this Egyptian professor, she came up to me and she corrected me on this because I was using the term non-Muslim. But if you define someone by, and I talked about this last month, it's like calling me a non-Christian or non-Jew. Why define someone in negative terms? And the real question is, and as Dan is talking about, this comes to the point of authenticity. Do we actually love people around us? Forget about connecting just so they know who we are. Do we connect with them so if they have a need, we are there for them? You know how many people in America are depressed? And no one cares. No one cares. I mean, if you do not have, no one gives a darn about anyone. So if I see my neighbor and it seems like they're having a bad day, is my day's mission to take care of them? Or have I gone into a lifestyle of work and career and putting my kids in piano lessons and Quran class and this and that I don't have time for the world? That's why I said here, we spoiled our children and neglected the larger ecosystem. Do we have empathy? And we were talking about this with the kids earlier, that in etymology, sympathy is to feel for someone. Empathy, sim, is to be next to. Pathos is feeling. Empathy is to enter into someone and feel what they're feeling as much as you can. If we were loving people, and I've actually talked to people in the African American community. People are like, yo, labor rights, y'all didn't show up. Women's abuse didn't show up. Native Americans are decimated, didn't show up. No. You were the opposite, guys. Malcolm actually wrote a letter about the immigrant Muslims who were coming in the 60s. He says, why aren't you guys moving to the ghetto? Why are you moving to suburbia? We actually have that letter now. Read the article by Rami Nashibi, Hijra to the Hood. Make the migration back to the inner cities. So you guys joined white flight. You came here on the backs of the Civil Rights Movement, 1964, Civil Rights Act. Immigration opens up. Suddenly people from Asian countries can immigrate to America. So you came here on the backs of the Civil Rights Movement that was not only led by African Americans, and this is where we get uncomfortable. It was led, the majority of white people, many of the white people who joined the Civil Rights Movement were from the Jewish community. This is where discourse has to be authentic. Am I pro-Zionist? I'm not. Am I anti-Jewish? I'm not, because that's racism. When I did a program in Florida, a concert at a Jewish community center, and I was hated on. And then when people hate on us, we call it racism. That's selective. I'm sorry, that's not real. So what I'm saying is that there's this reactionary paradigm that has to change, but it has to change in a very authentic way. It has to, do we actually love people of other faiths? Do we break outside of our bubble and actually care for people? And so when the African community says, okay, so you came on the backs of the Civil Rights Movement, you moved to America, yes, some of you struggled in the early years of residency. Because of the way migration happened, if we know the history, England was allowing labor workers mostly. The United States was only allowing in the early years professionals. So it was an intellectual colonization, a brain drain. They took all the doctors and engineers from all over the world and put them in one place. Vast majority were Muslim in the 60s and 70s. You had an opportunity to take a stance. If you were really about your faith, you would have aligned with your spiritual brethren in the inner city. Not only Muslims, any faith that you connected, you had a spiritual affinity to. But no, you aligned with privilege. You did. And you built your mosque. Imam Siraj Wahaj, I asked him recently, a few years ago, I said, I haven't seen you around that much. He says that I think I mentioned this last month, but he said that I was so busy fundraising for chandeliers for suburban mosques, while inner city mosques didn't have roofs over their head. So we played the game, guys. And the reality is, and this is no offense to anyone that's Caucasian, because I'm not anti-white. And I think that the discourse is not about colors, it's about truth. But if I'm going to use this as a category, there's a segment of this community of America that's more privileged. And we aligned with that segment. We wanted to be part of the country club. And when that group, because if the African Americans were mad at us, we wouldn't care. But when that group speaks bad about us, it hurts. It hurts when Trump speaks bad about us, not because we like Trump, but we like that community. We wanted our bosses and our corporations. We worked so hard to be good employees. We didn't start a Muslim hospital in America. 40,000 Muslim doctors, no hospital. We were good doctors. And we talked about how messed up the healthcare system is. We didn't create a new paradigm. We were employees. Very few engineering firms. We were employees. We worked for Google. We worked for the corporate. We worked for Coke. We made a lot of money working for corrupt corporations. And if I said this, I'd be a hippie. I'm not a hippie. I don't even vote Democrat. I don't vote. But I'm saying, like, I'm not, even though I have a guitar, I'm not that, like, oh, new age, like Whole Foods. That's not even who I am. I'm like a simple boy from Indiana. But the reality is, we did not make courageous choices. And so when this happens, and it's like, woe me, America doesn't understand me, what have we done for America to understand? And the reality is, the only time, and Obama mentioned this, in a moment of rare courage, he said, we have to be careful, we can't deport all the Muslims because the healthcare system would fall apart. He didn't say that on national television, but the reality is that is true. You actually can't technically deport, because you would literally not, the healthcare system would actually fall apart. But what would happen if when people said deport Muslims, 40 million people that didn't have healthcare until Obamacare said, no, you can't deport Muslims. Because if each of those 40,000 doctors did 5 hours a week of free clinic work, there would be no healthcare crisis. So if we were not, and we wouldn't do it for that, but if we were actually missed, they say live a life that when you die, the devil rejoices and the disenfranchised of the world weep. What would happen then if we were living those lives? We wouldn't need press releases. Because we would be talking to our neighbors every day. How many people actually have someone of the opposite faith come into your house more than twice a year? So what are we talking about? It's disingenuous to do an event. We do events like interfaith events, and people say stuff like, Moses is mentioned more in the Quran than Muhammad. It's like, so wait, what's the psychology there? What are you trying to say? The Quran, did you know Jesus is, Muhammad's mother's not mentioned, but Isa, Jesus. So what's the psychology, buddy? And actually it's a lie. Muhammad is mentioned more, but he's mentioned the second person. Every time you say you, he's talking to the Prophet. So he's not going to speak in third person about someone you're talking to. So it's disingenuous anyways. But you don't get this like fake rhetoric. So for me, this is a moment of empowerment. It's not a moment of, look, Trump is doing what Trump is going to do. He's a media hog. I mean, he loves the attention. And that's, you know what? All the power to him, because he's working harder than any of us. No, really, he's actually working harder than any of us. He's doing the circuit. We're not doing the circuit. And for many of us, even when we come to these weekly gatherings, we do go back to our lifestyles. And I'm not speaking directly to all of you because I don't know you, but my students, I talk to them about this. And these are sharp kids, good university, all that. They play the game. But the reality is that our generation, even after Paris happened, just like after 9/11, will still watch 8 hours of movies on a weekend. No, so really, we'll still be spoiled brats. We'll still play 4 hours of Halo. We'll still watch 6 hours of NFL on Sundays and Thursdays. Now every day of the week there's a game. We're right now we're thinking about Star Wars more than we're thinking about Paris. We're thinking about, oh shoot, I haven't watched a Creed, the new Rocky movie. We still have our favorite TV show, and if Netflix was to shut down for a day, it would make us depressed. If our Wi-Fi is not working, we freak out. We're not real about our indignation. We're not real, and we're not ready to make the courageous choices that are necessary. And I knew, like I was speaking, and I'll stop here. I keep saying I'll stop. I'm not stopping. I was speaking at over Labor Day at ISNA, and I was giving a talk. And ISNA always makes me uncomfortable, not because I don't like ISNA, it's a cool organization, but they're always like really big crowds, and I always feel like a hypocrite in what I say, and this was one of those hypocritical moments. I was speaking about materialism, and I realized I come from a privileged family, and I have a nice house, and all that. And so I made the commitment, and I'm giving this as an example, because I do think bold choices are necessary. I made a couple of commitments. Those who follow my Facebook, I made a decision not to get married, which was kind of a weird thing for the Muslim community, but it was like a nice shock and awe for them. But that was a real decision. I made a decision to get rid of my house and move into a small basement. And I made certain decisions. I made a decision to not buy new clothes, which I've been doing for a few years anyways. But I made certain decisions because I knew until I did that, I couldn't speak about something that I had not applied. And the way people freaked out at every one, the marriage one was the worst, because in the Muslim community, you have the concerns are moon sighting, meat, music, and marriage, the 4 M's. And God forbid you speak on those 4, right? Anyways, and people said, it's half of your faith. And I said, Mom, no, we didn't get married. They're like, oh, okay. But like, But there was this, and it wasn't a messiah complex, like I'm going to change the world, but I realized the type of work I want to do, I'm not going to be home, so I don't want someone else to raise my kids. I'm not going to make more than $20,000 a year because I refuse to go back to what I used to do and build my own business. I just want to be on, so I might as well make that decision. And then when I left my house, people are like, oh, but there's balance in your deen. You know, if you make money, you can enjoy it. And I was like, look, man, balance is not living in castles. Mansa Musa was considered today, if he had lived today, Forbes magazine said he would have been the richest man to ever live. He would have been the West African king. His brother was actually the king before him. His brother sent 700 ships to the Americas before Christopher Columbus. 700. Most of them ended up in South America. Not 3, like not Mayflower, Plymouth, like 700 ships. That's why he left. He never came back. That's how Mansa Musa became the king. Mansa Musa today would have been worth $700 billion. Mansa Musa, if he walked into our homes, would think that we were the kings because he didn't have climate control. He didn't have electricity. The pharaohs, when they were hot, they had people fanning them. You know how much that sucks? That's like, like if the air conditioning stops for 1 second, you start going like that. That was his lifestyle. And he was the pharaoh that we talk about. We are extremely privileged. Like Louis C.K. says, like you're on the plane and the Wi-Fi stops, and suddenly he says it's so weird. You're talking about entitlement. People feel entitled for blessings they didn't know existed a week before. Suddenly you're like pissed off because the internet's not working. He's like you're on a multi-ton metal device flying through the sky. Why are you worried about internet? Right? Like I think we talked about last month, that Harvard professor lady who said in the 70s, when the plane would land, everyone would light up their cigars. Now people light up their phones because it's an addiction. So let's not talk about social revolution. Let's not talk about why do people hate us. Let's not talk about what are we going to do. Because the reality is we can talk all we want. But if we're not willing to actually make lifestyle sacrifices, we're not going to do any of it. Why isn't there one TV show, one radio program? I mean, like there's no basic infrastructure for messaging. And there isn't going to be. It's not like, and because I'm involved in national work, it's not like there's a pocket of people that are creating dynamic media. There isn't. There's not one good Muslim artist in America outside of like Lupe or someone. Like I'm saying, like within the immigrant Muslim community. And I love our friends, but like native deen type stuff is pandering to the community. And those are my friends. And I'm a Muslim artist, but like we haven't built any of the infrastructure, and we're no closer to doing it because the critical mass of our community cannot get over the fact that you don't have to make $100,000 and up. Right now, it's like $200,000 is minimum. 9/11 opened up the doors to being a lawyer because it's reactionary. Until then, you couldn't even be a lawyer. So we need a greater deal of courage and authenticity and honesty. And without that honesty, conversations, I'm sorry, status messages don't really do much. Liking stuff like that, you know, you've probably seen that picture where that kid is starving and everyone has their thumbs up. Liking doesn't do much. Direct action is necessary. Rhetoric doesn't do much. Conferences speaking to the converted doesn't do much. Teaching seerah, the life of the Prophet, out of context doesn't do much. It's actually escapism. Because we don't take theory and actually do anything with it. And so I've talked to Amanda and Ivana that even with the Madinah project, we have to apply what we do, and they're working on some ideas for that, that there should be, for every day of theory, the next day there should be a service project. And if 10% of people show up tomorrow for that, then we're not real. And 10% of people will show up tomorrow if that happened. Because it's very easy for us to come here and talk about other people, and they did this to us. And it's like, what have you done? What have you done? What Malcolm wasn't tripping on what people were saying. Malcolm said at the end of his life, he said, why did you tell your bodyguards to not show up? And he says, if they kill me, then they kill me. If they don't kill me, I'll keep speaking until they kill me. The guy didn't care, right? I just want to, 2 other things. This is a sermon, a saying from Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, one of his sermons. It's been translated by Hamza Yusuf. O community of Muslims, roll up your sleeves, for the matter is momentous. Prepare for an imminent journey. Garner provisions now as the journey is long. Lighten your loads. For before you is an ascent most steep. Only those traveling lightly shall bear its climb. O humanity, before the hour comes, you will see wonders, vast tribulations, and difficult times. Darkness will prevail, and foulness will take the forefront. Those who enjoin right will be oppressed. By the way, this is not dogma, not those who are Muslim. وَتَوَاسَوْا بِالْحَقِّ. We come together in truth, not in religion. We come together in transcendent truth. O humanity, before the hour comes, you will see wonders, vast tribulations, and difficult times. Darkness will prevail, and foulness will take the forefront. Those who enjoin right will be oppressed, and those who condemn vice will be suppressed. Hence, strengthen your faith for that time, and cling to faith as you would cling to your dear life. Flee to righteous deeds, and force yourself to perform them. Be patient during difficult times, and you will eventually arrive to eternal bliss. So that's my message. I don't think it's helpful for us to be victimized, to see ourselves as victimized. We are, even in our relative tribulation, we are in privilege. In our moments of tribulation, we're in privilege. In the Quran, Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim, قُلْ جَاءَ الْحَقُّ وَمَا يُبْدِيُ بَاطِلُ وَمَا يُعِيدُ. And this is a beautiful verse. I just shared it with the younger group. That قُلْ, say, جَاءَ الْحَقُّ, that truth has arrived. This is in the Quran. That truth has arrived. Okay? وَيُبْدِيُ الْبَاطِلُ and وَمَا يُبْدِيُ الْبَاطِلُ. So that falsehood or darkness will no longer be established. When truth arrives, the procession of truth comes, darkness will not be established, وَمَا يُعِيدُ, and it will not return. Darkness will never rise again, it will not return. But what's the condition? That when truth arrives. But if the people of truth define themselves like at least we don't kill people, then nothing will change. Nothing will change. Passivity has to be destroyed. Lifestyle changes have to be made. Career changes have to be made. People have to be down. And if ISIS people are willing to die, Malcolm was willing to die for this cause, we're not willing to live for it. And if ISIS people are literally willing to blow themselves up for whatever cause they believe in, ask ourselves, is there something we believe in the realm of goodness, that we would die for? And if not, then they're not beating us because the media is amplifying their message. They're beating us because they're a hell of a lot more passionate about what they believe in than we are about what we believe in. And they're willing to die for something, and we give it 2 hours a week of our status messages and some type of a service project once we've built our castles and overindulged in our children. So I just want to end with Surah Asr. I'm sorry, that was a little intense and long, but Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Wal Asr, inna al-insana lafi khusr, illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat, wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Wal Asr, by the squeezing time, inna al-insana lafi khusr. All mankind is categorically in the state of loss. And as I mentioned before, insan is used as singular to show even though it's all mankind being in loss, when you're in loss, you're going to feel lonely, you're going to feel like a singular human being. That illa is the exception, and all of these conditions are required for the exception. Illa ladina, now the plural is used to show that when you're not in loss, even if you're alone, you'll be in a group. Because when you're alone, you're in the angelic presence. You're in the presence of all the spiritual forefathers, and not only Muslim forefathers. You're in the presence of the great Native American chiefs that were honorable people that were massacred. You're in the presence of people, the good people of Europe that have stood up for truth, even when there were people around them that were speaking otherwise. You're in the presence of when one of the great Muslim scholars from Yemen, he said the greatest saints he met, and I'm not, like as I mentioned last time, I'm not a part of a Muslim group like Sufis or Salafis or Ikhwanis. This is just part of our deen. We have righteous people, and this guy came from Yemen, and he said, I want to go to Atlanta first. And this guy didn't even speak English, right? Habib Omar. And he said, I want to go to Atlanta first. Someone said, why? He said, the greatest spiritual men and women of America were buried there. Who was buried in Atlanta? Who's he talking about? So when you're not alone when you're on this path. You're on the path of transcendent esoteric truth, not exoteric ideology, dogma, and religion. You transcend that. Islam is your path to God, but you're able, on that road, you're able to connect with other people. What illadhina amanu, they believe. But it's not passive belief. This whole notion, I'm Muslim but I'm not practicing, Islam is a verb. It's not a noun. So there's no identity without practice. It's running, as I mentioned last time, you can't say I'm running and not running. It's not runner, it's running, it's active motion. And the problem with belief that's not practiced, the devil, in both the biblical story and the Muslim story, the devil's issue was not belief, it was practice. He believes more than anyone in this room. He is mad at God. How can you be mad at someone you don't believe in? He had an issue of obedience. So to say that I'm not going to practice, well, it's bad company. Illadina amanu wa amilu salihat. Not thumma, not later they do righteous deeds. And they do righteous deeds. And righteous deeds is not a part-time profession. We don't, now they make, the term used for making money is making a living. So we're technically calling living money. Making a living is making money. How do you make life? الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. And then these have to be done individually, like Abraham, when he was an island unto himself. These have to be done individually. But the next two, tawasaw in Arabic comes from tafa'ala, which means to be done together. Tawasaw bil-haqqi wa tawasaw bil-sabr. Coming together in truth. Once again, this is not coming together in dogma. This is not coming together in Shias versus Sunnis. This is not coming together in men versus women. This is not coming together in socioeconomically rich suburbs versus inner cities. This is not coming together in American exceptionalism, America versus... I heard a Muslim tell me, yeah, we should start movements in America because just like McDonald's is globalized, our movement will be. And people follow everything that comes out of America. I never talked to the dude again. Like, it was just like, what are you talking about? Like, no, really, like, it was just like, really, dude? So our message is a burger? Really? That's the analogy? وَتَوَاسَوْا بِالْحَقِّ. They come together in truth. وَتَوَاسَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. And they come together in patience. But patience is not passive. And one thing I want to say, Sarwar is a good friend of mine, and we were talking about this. For those of you that were there and heard Brother Sarwar talking about love, people misunderstand that. People think of it as some like passive Sufi, like, oh, mythical. Let's keep in mind that the post-colonial, and this is stuff that we don't talk about after 9/11, and I don't really care. If it's truth, if it's not violence against innocent, then we don't have to hide away. Like the word jihad is a valid term. Yes, it means internal purification, but it also means standing up. If a woman is raped, you go and attack the army. That's what our people did. So to change who we are is not authentic, and no one's going to respect you for that. Because then they're going to read in the books that did happen. So reality is, there are different levels of jihad. It's always about containing yourself, even in battle. It's not about holy wars against innocent people, but it is about righteous war. And if this country understands that, this country would say that World War II, even though there's difference of opinion on that, was a righteous war. So then why wouldn't there be righteous war for a spiritual community? And the reality is the Sufis of North Africa were the ones who fought the French, and they fought the Italians. Sufism, and I'm not part of a group, but it doesn't have to just be kumbaya singing songs. There's a time for singing songs, and there's a time where Umar Mukhtar, when his country was being invaded, so this was a defensive war, by the Italians in World War II, Mussolini wanted to reestablish the Roman Empire. He's like, let's take North Africa, it'll be easy. He fought for 20 years on horseback, and he was part of a Tijani Sufi order. Okay, the Murabitun in Morocco were fighting the French. So we let's not twist our faith into some type of a new age. And I'm like, I play guitar and stuff, but I'm not like this new age hippie spirituality. Where it's like, yeah, the world can burn, but let's just do dhikr and remember God. It's not escapism. You strengthen yourself, you go to Cave Hira so you can go back to Makkah. Madinah was not a big Cave Hira, escapist. So when we hear the esoteric love is in some cases being kind and love, if you have an oppressor, is taking him out of his oppression. Right? And I think a country that I was born in the US, a country that was built on fighting the British will understand that.